Chapter 90, Heads or Tails. De baleno vero sufficit se rex habitat caput et regina caudum. Bracton, L3C3. Latin from the books of the laws of England, which, taken along with the context, means of that all whales captured by anybody on the coast of the land, the king, as honorary grand harpooner, must have the head, and the queen be respectfully presented with tail. A division which, in the whale, is much like having an apple. There is no intermediate remainder. Now, as this law, under a modified form, is to this day in force in England, and it offers in various respects a strange anomaly touching the general law of fast and loose fish. It is here treated in a separate chapter on the same courteous principle that prompts the English railways to be at the expense of a separate car, specifically reserved for the accommodation of royalty. In the first place, in curious proof of the fact that the above-mentioned law is still in force, I proceed to lay before you a circumstance that happened within the last 2 years. It seems that some honest mariners of Dover or Sandwich or some of the Sinecures ports had, after a hard chase, succeeded in killing and beaching a fine whale, which they had originally descried afar off from the shore. Now, the Cinque Ports are partially or somehow under the jurisdiction of a sort of policeman or beadle called a Lord Warden. Holding the office directly from the Crown, I believe, all the royal emoluments incident to the Cinque Port territories became, by assignment, his. By some writers this often is called a sinecure, but not so, because the Lord Warden is busily employed at times in fobbing his perquisites, which are his chiefly by virtue of the same fobbing of them. Now, when these poor sunburnt mariners, barefooted, with their trousers rolled up high on their eely legs, had wearily hauled their fat fish high and dry, promising themselves a good 150 pounds from the precious oil and bone, and in fantasy sipping rare tea with their wives and good ale with their cronies, upon the strength of their respective shares, up steps a learned and most Christian and charitable gentleman, with a copy of Blackstone under his arms, and, laying it upon the whale's head, he says, "Hands off this fish. My master's is a fast fish. I seize it as the Lord Warden's." Upon this, the poor mariners, in their respectful consternation, so truly English, knowing not what to say, fall to vigorously scratching their heads all around, meanwhile ruefully glancing from the whale to the stranger. But that did in no wise mend the matter, or soften the hard heart of the learned gentleman with the copy of the Blackstone. At length, one of them, after a long scratching about for his ideas, made bold to speak. "Please, sir, who is the Lord Warden?" "The Duke." "But the Duke had nothing to do with the taking of the fish." "It is his." "We have been at great trouble and peril and some expense, and is all to go to the Duke's benefit? Are we getting nothing at all for our pains but our blisters? It is his." "Is the Duke so very poor as to be forced to this desperate mode of getting a livelihood?" "It is his." "I thought to relieve my old bedridden mother by part of my share of this whale." "It is his." "Won't the Duke be content with a quarter or a half?" "It is his." In a word, the whale was seized and sold, and his Grace the Duke of Wellington received the money. Thinking that, viewed in some peculiar lights, the case might be, by a bare possibility, in some small degree be deemed, under the circumstances, a rather hard one, an honest clergyman of the town respectfully addressed the note to his Grace, begging him to take the case for those unfortunate mariners into full consideration, to which my Lord Duke in substance replied, both letters were published, that he had already done so and received the money, and would be obliged to the reverend gentleman if for the future he, the reverend gentleman, would decline meddling with other people's business. Is this the still militant old man standing in the corners of the 3 kingdoms on all hands, coercing the alms of beggars? It will readily be seen that in this case the alleged right of the Duke to the whale was a delegated one from the sovereign. We must needs inquire then on what principle the sovereign is originally invested with the right. The law itself has already been set forth, but Plowden gives us the reason for it. Says Plowden, the whale is so caught belongs to the king and queen because of its superior excellence, and by the soundest commentators this has ever been held a cogent argument in such matters. But why should the king have the head and the queen the tail? The reason for that, ye lawyers. In his treatise on Queen Gold, or Queen Pin Money, on Old King's Bench author, one William Prynne, thus discourses: Ye tail as ye queens, that ye queen's wardrobe may be supplied with whalebone. Now this was written at a time when the black limber bone of the Greenland, or right whale, was largely used in ladies' bodices. But this same bone is not in the tail, it is in the head, which is a sad mistake for a sagacious lawyer like Prynne. But is the queen a mermaid to be presented with a tail? An allegorical meaning may lurk there. There are two royal fish so styled by the English law writers, the whale and the sturgeon, both royal property under certain limitations, and nominally supplying a 10th branch of the crown's ordinary revenue. I know not that any other author has hinted of the matter, but by inference it seems to me that a sturgeon must be divided in the same way as a whale, the king receiving the highly dense and elastic head peculiar to that fish, which, symbolically regarded, may possibly be humorously grounded upon some presumed congeniality, and thus there seems a reason in all things, even the law. This is the end of chapter 90. So he talks about a situation in England. I'm not sure if it still applies. It probably doesn't. They did away with a whole bunch of the royal perquisites, the royal bennies, gimmies, benefits that royalty has in England. Those have been slowly done away with over the years. And so, I mean, one of the things it used to be is that all swans in England were the property of the crown. So it's a swan, it's property of the crown. And the whale, and here he's talking about the whale. And it's like the head of the whale belongs to the king and the tail of the whale belongs to the queen. And it's like, that's like splitting an apple because, there's no legs in the middle. It just goes head continuously down the size, but you can match it at the flippers. And he talked about how earlier when chopping up the whale, how there is a skull there and there is what amounts to a neck. So because there's a neck and a skull, that means forward is the head. Now the sperm whale is 1/3 head, but most whales aren't all head like that. And obviously there's a point where the tail narrows down and then widens. And you can take the narrowest point, which, in a whale is like this, but you can take the narrowest point and say, okay, that's where the tail starts. Not, just before the flukes. You can say that's where the tail starts. So the fishermen were really kind of cheated out of almost all of their whale by the Duke, the Lord Warden. So they were cheated out of most of the whale by him, even if his rights granted him by the king were actually legitimate. And it kind of wasn't. And they used a great word in here, sinecure. So Sinecure. And that means a job where you get paid to do nothing. And government jobs, a lot of government jobs are often described as sinecures. And back in the day, what people used to do was when political parties got elected, they would go and they would take all of their cronies, all of their buddies, and they would give them these jobs where all they do is they sign up and they collect a paycheck. And a lot of corruption works this way, and a lot of people essentially, make huge amounts of money by, giving away these patronage jobs. It is political patronage. And there are places where it's happened infamously. It happened a whole lot in New York under Boss Tweed. The federal government passed laws preventing it at the low levels. The absolute top jobs are still given out as favors. So, when Biden got elected, he probably had a dozen people who were like, congratulations, you are ambassador to Albonia. Congratulations, you are ambassador to Nowhereistan. And he handed out these ambassadorships to people who it's like, okay, you get to represent the US and get a fat paycheck and a big expense account and take a 4-year vacation, 4-year paid vacation. So there are a lot of, every president does this sort of thing. But before it was like whole swaths of the government were just replaced when parties changed hands. And so federal law was changed that got rid of that. Marion Barry, who was mayor of DC for a good long time until the FBI arrested him for smoking crack. And there's all sorts of stories about that one that you'll hear from me later when, you're grown up and you say, hey, Pop, tell me about Marion Barry. Like, I got stories. Anyway, that's one of the ways he kept power, because he had all of these jobs and all of these people on the city payroll. And Washington, D.C. was a special case where they could get away with putting all sorts of people on the city payroll because a lot of the city money came from the federal government. So the federal government gave the city of Washington, D.C. money. So essentially, for a good long time, Washington, D.C. essentially had infinite money. They had like the cheat code of all cheat codes for government. And so because they had all this money and the mayor had all of these patronage jobs, because all of the, had all of these people working for him in the city, he would get reelected and reelected and reelected because they know that once he goes away, their jobs go away. And so once he went away, the Congress clamped down and said, okay, DC, you've got to like balance your budget, rein it in. We're not going to, gravy train stops here, or at least slows down a little bit. So DC had some strict financial controls and got things a little bit better, but all sorts of political patronage jobs. And this is one of those things that's just been going on probably as long as recorded history. Where it's like, okay, yeah, you're my buddy, you keep me in power, so I'm going to give you money or give you a job that is, I'm going to make you a job that you don't have to do anything for. Actually, I'm thinking there's probably some good instances of this even in the Bible, that this is something that is being kicked around for like several thousand years. I seen, yeah, Daniel had some run-ins with people like that who are just like, okay, they support the emperor, and so the emperor gives them stuff. And it's just like a whole bunch of people who just got this money for doing nothing but supporting the emperor. So that's like an old thing, and hopefully it goes away, because that's bad. It's corruption and no bueno, no good.